What is jazz in the 21st century? Where is it going? Is it still holding on to the values of where it came from?
You go to these studios, you go to these universities, and you get one side of the picture. And there's a whole other side that y'all don't even know.
That was from the fascinating documentary Uprooted. When we think of jazz dance, we may think of Broadway, the West End, Liza Minelli, or West Side Story. This illuminating film takes us way further back to the roots of this dance of African descent, born of slavery and entangled with the African-American experience through hip-hop and beyond. It's dancer turned director Kadifa Wong's first film, and she joins us now from London. Hello, Kadifa. Congratulations on this film. Now, lots of dancers don't know about the history of dance, let alone the general public. Tell us why you wanted to make a film taking us back through its history.
Well, we kind of realised that a lot of an art's value is tied to its history. So when you look at how ballet, for example, is funded, or contemporary dance, modern dance is funded, people attached its value and its monetary value to this great classical history that came up through nobility and, the courts and things. And jazz dance had just a richer history, but because it came from the people in the streets, the monetary value isn't there. And so we wanted to make sure that people understood that this was just as much a legitimate art form as ballet and modern contemporary dance were, and show that there was that rich history there.
Now, the film raising some interesting questions about ownership and cultural appropriation. And why is that important, do you think?
I think, again, when you look at, say, for example, we ask the question nowadays, Black Lives Matter, this is an example of why. And appropriation kind of dehumanizes the people that create something. So if you really enjoy a movement, you've got to appreciate the people that actually gave the music. Jason Samuel Smith says it best, this dance form is cool, but I don't want to mess with you as a person. And there's danger in that because you're not appreciating the people that have produced the art that you so admire. So it's, there's that slippery slope between appropriation and migration and transmission where people share, and that's a wonderful thing, and that should be encouraged. And we don't want to kind of discourage people from taking part in art forms and practices that aren't of their own, but it's how you give it, how you attribute it when you do become part of that world. So as long as you attribute something where it comes from, that's great.
Well, nearly 6 dancers, choreographers, educators and scholars offer their insights in Uprooted. Take a look.
A great jazz dancer has a strong sense of self. A great jazz dancer isn't afraid to get dirty.
Jazz is an opportunity for everyone to bring their own culture, their own style. It's really what they feel in their heart and their soul.
Great jazz dancer knows how to focus, how to get the audience to look at them and say, this is what I want you to look at.
Now, Kadifa, Uprooted highlights African Americans like Pepsi Bethel and Jojo Smith, who was John Travolta's dance consultant on Saturday Night Fever. They made enormous contributions to jazz dance, but they're often overlooked in favour of white choreographers such as Bob Fosse and Jack Cole, who worked with Marilyn Monroe. Now, those talented white men are the acknowledged masters of the art form, while many black innovators are barely known. How and why did that happen?
There's so many reasons. I mean, you look at sort of at the time when the greats like, Bob Fosse were creating their work, black people still didn't have access to the legal kind of channels that would have allowed them to kind of flourish, to have courts of law, to copyright their work. It's also about social structure, so it's not about ownership. And Thomas de France talks about the kind of capitalist ownership of moves, whereas in the black community, it's all about sharing and it's not about claiming it for yourself. So these moves were just passed down, these dances were passed down from generation to generation, with everyone adding to it, but no one really saying, I am the one that's claimed this and you can't do it without my instruction. So there's several reasons that it happened, but I think it just kind of chronologicalized along the history of how America operates within those two separate communities, and it's a really kind of fascinating insight into how white American kind of society operated and black African American society operated.
Now, there is really delightful archive footage in the film of dances like the Patin Juba and the Cakewalk. Talk to us a bit about these dances.
Yeah, so the patting juba was a form of communication. So it wasn't necessarily a form of entertainment, but it was how enslaved Africans would transmit messages to each other about what was safe, about, the Underground Railroad, how to escape. The cakewalk was actually one of my favorite because it poked fun at the masters, and it was a way of the enslaved Africans to find a moment of happiness in their condition, and how they would sort of satire. And sort of what I like about it is that not only was it the sort of birth of the formation of Broadway dancing that we see today, but it also informed things like mass and masquerade that you see in Carnival, that you see in the streets of Brazil, the Caribbean, London, and all of these kind of things. So it had such a far-reaching influence for a dance that was, essentially born out of mockery.
And the Charleston has its roots in the juba. It was brought to France in 1925 by someone mentioned briefly in your film, a 19-year-old African-American performer who went on to be an international star, Josephine Baker, of course. And she was very political. She was involved in the French resistance and the civil rights movement. What was her role in jazz dance?
She was wonderful. She had such a wonderful way of moving that she inspired, so many people. And Salima Knight actually highlights Josephine Baker in a way that hasn't really been highlighted before, in that her jazz dancing influenced the work of, say, people like Balanchine, who brought a jazziness to their ballet. So she had a wonderful way of moving various parts of her bodies at the same time, this very beautiful polycentric movement. And, she was able to infuse that through the music and show that it could translate to other art forms. Because she was a singer as well, because she was political, I think she infused all of that into the way that she moved and presented herself on stage. And you can see it, and it's glorious. And I think having found refuge in a city like Paris, which, as we know, was such a wonderful kind of safety net for African Americans who were going through segregation at that time, she was able to be herself and move freely. And I guess that kind of helped her with the political nature of her work as well, her ability to speak up.
Well, October marks 95 years since Josephine Baker's first performance here in France on the Champs-Élysées. Let's have a look back at her life.
Paris in the roaring 20s. Jazz had arrived in the city, but African-American men and women weren't yet on the scene. A musical production in 1925 changed all that when 19-year-old American Josephine Baker broke out on the scene.
She was unknown before the show, and she became a star in a matter of minutes. People applauded. We had never seen dancing like that. We did the waltz in Paris. And here was someone who was going wild for once. From that day on, she became a star. She was called Black Pearl, Black Venus.
The dance was the Charleston. While it was all over New York, Josephine Baker caused quite the stir in Paris. A few weeks later, she headlined with the custom-made belt of artificial bananas. Baker became one of Paris's preeminent entertainers and was living her dream far away from her native country, the United States. It was an acceptance she never forgot. During the Second World War, Josephine Baker became an informant throughout Europe for the French resistance.
Qui rapporte d'une tournée en Égypte un chèque de 4,5 millions de francs destiné à la résistance.
After the end of the war, Baker received France's highest honor by President Charles de Gaulle. She bought a chateau and adopted 12 children. While Baker spent the rest of her life in France, she did return to the United States to take part in the fight for civil rights.
Khalifa, Josephine Baker did get an enormous recognition here in France, unlike many of her counterparts in the United States. Why do you think that was?
I think the founding reason was racism. In America, they were having segregation. They were still not allowing blacks and whites to socialize. They still hadn't granted African Americans equal rights. Whereas she found acceptance in Paris, not just because of what she could do, but because of who she was as a person. She was valued. And so I think immediately that happens to you, produce your best work.
Now, as well as directing films, you direct plays. You were due to go on tour with your play, Black Women Dating White Men, but because of COVID, you had to take it online. And you have your own production company that you created to help increase diversity. Tell us a little bit about the need to form your own company.
Yeah, it was born out of the fact that when I was a dancer and an actress, there just wasn't the opportunities. And I was often told by people that I wasn't Black enough or I didn't look right. And it was based on their stereotypical sort of interpretation of what a Black person should look like or what a Chinese person should look like, being my surname is Wong. So we decided, along with a friend, that we would set up a production company where we would be more inclusive, because when I lived in New York and started training, I was going up for roles as just woman. There was no color attached to it. There was nothing attached to it other than what myself and what I would bring to the role as a woman or a dentist or whatever that kind of role was. And they don't do that in the UK. And so I really wanted to make sure that we were inclusive and that we could just have the right people and the best people and ensure opportunity for everybody.
Okay, well, Uprooted is at the San Francisco Dance Film Festival later this month and at Raindance at the end of October. Just before we go, we always end with our guests' cultural pick of the moment. What have you chosen?
Well, I've chosen Black History Month in the UK because it's for the month of October. And actually, it's something I'm proud of because my father was part of a group of people that actually were the ones that, set that up in the UK and brought it to the fore. And to see where it's turned in today, sort of 25 years later, is fantastic. Actually, more than 25 years, actually. So, so I picked that as my cultural moment because that's happening until the end of October.
Okay, Khadifa Wong, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to leave you with a production that's being taken out onto the streets in South East London to mark Black History Month. It's bite-sized theatre during social distancing times, the Ragtime to Grime, Bring It Home tour, and is being performed by Tejiman Gill's Grounded movement. With a small cast of 2 dancers and a rapper, it explores the stories of young people and the power of music. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
The laughter whizzes round the room and lingers in the air. Like the odor of perfume, there's not even a care. The clinks of wine glasses underpin the syncopation to the rhythm and the voices of the pointless conversation. Where performers would smile but keep their hands on the keys and keep their eyes to themselves if they intend to stay free. Good times, bad times, black times, white times, happy and sad times, wrong and right times.
Running for the White House is your weekly look at what's going on in the U.S. presidential race, whether it's the picture of the week, the latest controversy, what campaigns are focusing on, or what to expect looking ahead. We bring you all the main stories in the lead up to the November 3rd election. So join us every Friday on France 24 for a new edition of Running for the White House.
Running for the White House on France 24 and France24.com.